if we were only looking at the part where we were using water that consumers would use, is there one energy that uses less water that would be more efficient for us to use, since we have a scarcity of water and other energies?
Well, wind use none, and wind uses none. Wind power generation requires no external input.
But I mean, if I could just sort of reshape your question, I think the way you want to think about it is when do I use the water? That, in other words, if I collect brown water, if I do the sorts of things, I have something that consumers would not use that could be, say, used for cooling a power plant or something like that. If it's salt water, which, for example, Diablo Canyon essentially is located right on the coast, it uses salt water for its cooling. So effectively, salt water, I guess you could say, people aren't interested in drinking it, they aren't interested in putting on their crops. So, I think the bigger issue is how do you balance and use the water that you have in a manner that you get the services that you want out. I think if I was going to say, that's more of the challenge, whereas it's less of do we have enough water or we don't have enough water. It's more of we're going to need to use the water that we do have more intelligently.
Yes, sir. Your question. Introduce yourself, please. Oh. Okay, speak up, Alan. Speak up, Alan.
Dr. Wallach, Alan. I wonder if you can kind of suggest how can you make a carbon fee or a carbon tax palatable in this particular country, since Americans seem to be predisposed to hate any tax or fee increase of any sort. Right now we're looking at cap and trade probably running into a very tough fight in Congress. You're right, the economics will control use. If something costs more, people will use it differently or perhaps use less. But can you suggest a strategy how would a political party, states, anyone sell higher fees and taxes?
I mean, personally, I guess, once again, I think it gets back to telling people the truth in the sense of saying, we got to raise the money. How would you rather have it raised? Would you have it be, the way I tell my students is I say, let's tax things we don't want people to do and not tax things that we want people to do. In other words, why do we tax people who work? Make you pay an income tax, make you pay all the various taxes associated with a consumption tax at that. If we don't want you to consume fossil fuels, so that to me is first step, is getting people to understand that, look, we've got to raise the revenues. This is the budget, it's got to be paid for, or at least our children pay for it. And then the second step for me is, and I think the difficult part is, you're not going to waste what you do tax me on. I mean, I think, there's in the economics profession, there's the so-called double dividend. And that, in other words, what I can do is by implementing a carbon tax, I can essentially get the double dividend of I raise the revenue necessary to fund government spending, and I provide people with a cleaner environment. And so, this is the classic economist free lunch that economists say doesn't exist. And the thing is I think, to me, I think the biggest problem is convincing people. If anything, I would almost think of tying it more to just simply saying we need to raise revenue, and we want to raise revenue in ways that perhaps mitigate environmental consequences. Less of saying, that maybe the environmental side we can almost say is a byproduct. But I mean, to me, what I find interesting for maybe it's just Stanford students, and other students that I teach, is that their view is maybe they're rational. They see that as, yes, I understand that logic. I understand how it could work. I mean, I think the other side of it is that makes the political part fail immediately is the equity. So you always get this environmental justice argument that people say, oh, it's going to hurt the poor people more than it's going to hurt the rich people. But I guess on that, once again, I think, gee, what are computers, spreadsheets, good quality information systems for if they're not for making sure that you aren't harming the poor people? But in other words, we have very good information systems to say, look, you're a poor person, you paid, you drive long distance to your job because you can't afford to live in the big house in the middle of the city. We're going to give you a tax credit for the fact that you paid that tax to mitigate some of the burden that's associated with that. So, I mean, I think it's all feasible. It's just that, once again, I think it's stating the problem in a manner that doesn't hide the cost, but it sort of makes it explicit. But that's me. I like getting the truth and shot right between the eyes rather than sort of behind the back.
Jana, we have time for one more question? Two more, okay, good. Yeah, Bill.
Yeah, thank you. Bill Moore with EV World. Today's USA Today has a cover article about the federal budget and the huge deficits they see us running up into 2020 or whatever it was. And I'm wondering, I think you've sort of begun to touch on this, how do we pay for this? We have to obviously be thinking about how do we build smarter cities, smarter transportation systems. All of that requires funding and revenue and things. How do we, given this, the size of the federal deficit, the problems California's having with its own budgets, other states, communities are having, how do we pay for this?
Who's first on that? Let's start with Bill and we'll go around. Because if Nobel Prize winning answer would be helpful. How do we do this?
Right, C. Krugman. Deficits don't matter. No, I mean, again, to me, this is where we need the innovation the most, right? I mean, we've got a lot of this now. Beautiful machines. I love my Prius, blah, blah, blah. The market has proved its capacity and capability for innovating over and over again to the nth degree. What we have neglected in this country is innovation in governance. And that has to do with the public fisc, the way we manage and design and implement our budgets. It has to do with our tax system. Is there anything less innovative than our tax system? So to me, this is about encouraging a rising generation of entrepreneurs and innovators to turn their attention away from the laptops and the iPads and iPhones and toward these seminal questions of community. I don't know what the answer is. I like innovations, for example, like the PACE program, the Property Assessed Clean Energy program that was innovated out of the Bay Area 5 years ago. And after Berkeley, Boulder was the second to adopt it. This idea that you tie public and private together in a long-term marriage. And you tie that to people's property and their ability to pay over time, amortization. I think the framework for something like PACE is extremely innovative, extremely practical, and is now showing it's got some traction or some legs. So those are the innovation opportunities I want to focus on, to see case studies in economics classes, business schools, blah, 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 and to more widely talk about in the media when it comes to showcasing innovation. So it's not just the gadget or the tool, it's actually the process, the governance method.